Now we'll go again. Okay. What we've been doing the last few weeks is we've been examining different submitted difficult ancestors, people who are, I hate to use the term brick wall, but that's one of the ways they refer to the people that they can't seem to find after a period of time, or seem to be very elusive. I would call them elusive ancestors more than brick wall people. But basically, the idea was we had a class previous to this one on researching, and then instead of using my family's examples, I decided it'd be a good idea if we had the missionaries submit their own family's names. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've had, let's see, this would be the 15th and 16th class today on this particular subject. So we've gone through quite a few. Now, here's a couple of things we've learned from, I didn't really learn them, but I've seen the evidence of it again, what was submitted. Number one, there's two different kinds of things that we're looking for. One is people are focusing on an individual and trying to find a birth date, death date, marriage date, something particular event in their life. That is similar to looking for a person, for a name, searching for a name, and it's very unproductive, and it really is not going to solve the problem of finding this individual, because we don't look for names. The basic activity of doing family history research is looking for sources. After we find the source, then we're going to go see if the family is in the source, but we don't focus in on the name, we focus in on the sources of the information, where the information can be found. So that's our main activity. The second part is people who are actually looking for an additional person or family. So it's generally an ancestor of an ancestor. And in recognizing this, we find out that in some cases, and even those that have come up in the last 2 weeks, what we've found is that the records just don't exist any further. I mean, we've gone back into the 1700s. We've gone into geographic areas where there are very few records kept. In one case, we had an investigation, and the ancestor lived on a small island in the Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska in the early 1800s. There just weren't a lot of things. We looked at the Greek Orthodox Church records. Those people were primarily Russian background, and that didn't happen, but we did find a huge amount of records in the National Archives. So there's just, there's records that can be found, and part of this process that we're talking about here is looking at the records. The other thing that we find is that the research process is sometimes characterized as being very linear. You go from step A to B to C to D, and then you come back to A, and they call it the research cycle. And so you have this kind of idea that if you just keep doing all these steps, you're going to find what you're looking for. Well, the answer is that isn't the way it works. The way it works is you're searching for sources. When you find a source, you go through and look through that particular source. But that may suggest all sorts of things. You may find people you're not even thought you were looking for. You may find other family members. You could find references to other sources. And then you start moving out, going out to these different areas. So it becomes a very kind of scattered way of doing it. The only way that you bring yourself back to the focus is to continue to ask the same questions. Who were these people? When did they live? Where did they live? Why did they do what they did? Why did they come to America? Why did they move across the country? Why did they move from Ohio to Indiana? These are the kinds of questions that help us focus on the records that might have been kept to find the family. Okay, with that introduction, what we're doing today is we're looking at an individual. Now, I'm going to be over on family tree. The reason why we've chosen Family Search Family Tree for our program is that this is a unified tree. What that means is that everyone who gets on this particular family tree has the same view of the same ancestors. So if I'm looking at my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, everyone who's interested in that person, whether they're related or not, but primarily, of course, those who are related, would be looking at the same person. And right now we're looking at what's called the Descendancy View. Let's switch over to the traditional view. Just kind of a side note here. The traditional view in family tree is changing. They are upgrading, or whatever you want to call it, changing it into a different one. So far, about 5% of the people on family tree have received the new interface, and they'll be phasing that in I think, 5% increments over the next few months. So different people going on will see a different interface here. So it's if you start seeing something new, that's because you're just been put in the group that got the new interface. Okay, so why are we looking at this? Well, because if I were to examine your individual family tree, if I were to get on Ancestry, or I was going to use one of your programs, Ancestral Quest, Roots Magic, Legacy Family Tree, Family Tree Maker, Family Tree Builder, any of these programs that are individual programs, I would be looking at what you already know. And that's the problem, because you don't know what you want to know, what you're trying to find out. So looking at your family tree is not going to help a whole lot. If we go to Family Search Family Tree, what we see is the accumulation of about 150 years of research. This is what everybody knows about the family. So in looking here, we're going to find out whether or not that information has already been put in by someone else. We find that to be very surprising. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, we've introduced this and sat down with people and showed them this program after even for hours at a time. And they are just absolutely amazed at the amount of information that's in here about their family, particularly photos and things like that. So I'm not saying that this information is unique here, because there are other places on the internet that you can find unified family trees, but in the sense that this is free and will remain free, and also is completely accessible by anyone who wants to go in and register for the program for free, then that makes it a desirable place to put information. Okay, so now the person that we're looking at today is Peter Anthony Williams. We'll go here. Because this is a unified tree, I can go directly to anyone, any ancestor. It doesn't matter if I'm related to the person or not. So I can go look at them. We'll try one and see if that's right. Yep. Okay. Now we'll go to the person. Now, one of the first things that you would want to do here is look at the data to see whether or not there are any obvious problems. One of the first things that we found, starting, in fact, the first class we had on this, the first person, the county was wrong. The city that was listed was not in that county and had never been in that county. And so we weren't sure if the county was right and the city was wrong, or the city was wrong and the county was, the city was the wrong one or the county was wrong. Okay, so now we're going to look at this. Graham, Dutchess, Glenn and Dutchess County, New York, 1836. died in 1918, Washington, Dutchess, New York, United States. It's got some residences, and let's go down and look at the sources and the family. Okay, so there's no parents identified. Got quite a bit of information here. Apparently, 2 different wives, and at least 5 children from the first wife, and another 11 children, so
10.
what? Total of 16 children.
10 from the second.
Oh, 10. Okay, so I didn't count. That's, oh yeah, I see it up there. Okay. 10 from the second, 5 from the first, 15 children. Okay, so what are some of the things that we can think about here right off the bat? Well, the first is that, assuming if we look around and see the birth dates on these children, we'll see that many of them lived long lives and well into the 1900s. So finding this family on a scale of 1 to 10 is going to be in the 8, 9, 10 ability. I mean, it's going to be fairly easy to find somebody in this family because there's going to be enough records of these people in that time period to find them. We're not faced with the kind of situation where we would be if it was the 1700s. So what are we going to look at first? Well, let's see where all these children were born and see how that matches up. Fishkill, Dutchess, and then we go down here. New York, Oak Summit, okay, Oak Summit, Millbrook, Bog Hollow, Oak Summit. This lady said, "Oh, I'm gonna have a baby. Let's run out to Bog Hollow and have our baby." Okay, well, now we're gonna have to ask why this lady was in Bog Hollow having a baby when she had a perfectly good home someplace else. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. I mean, things like that happen. I mean, we have reports of people having babies on freeways and all sorts of places. So, obviously this works. Okay, now why are we checking this? This is just kind of a basic concept of consistency. What we find here is very commonly you'll find parents supposedly born and died in a certain location. You go look at the children, they're born all over the country. You go, well, I don't think so. I think that what happened was that they started poking people into this family without trying to figure out if they were actually that part of that family. Sort of a same name, same person syndrome kind of thing. This is going to be an extremely common name, Peter Anthony. Rachel Williams, Peter Williams. That's not going to help us a whole lot from that standpoint. And none of the children seem to have anything that would approach to be, except Royal Urban down here and Eli Yu. Those are kind of unusual people. So other than that, the rest of these names are going to have hundreds, maybe thousands of people with the same name. And even in New York, it's not going to be a unique thing. So that's going to present a little bit of a challenge. Okay, the first thing that I do, and I kind of do this in the background, but we're going to talk about it here. And one of the things about this process here is that if I had a patron coming in, this is kind of the concept of what we tried to work on, is when they handed in all of these different challenges, or whatever you want to call them, from all these people, the idea was, I thought, well, I'll just look at them. And then I thought, no, that's not fair. What I really ought to do is treat it just like somebody walked through the door of the library and I started to tell me their problem. And then what I would do in order to kind of analyze the process, I would go through and try to see how this worked. And using that process, what I could do would be to, that put everybody on the same footing, but it also made it so that we could see what the obvious errors were initially. Now, a lot of the things that I will say or have been saying about the class in the classes, I would not normally say to patrons. So I'm not going to make the side comments that I usually make here will not necessarily be what I would say to the person. I have a little more tact than that, I hope. But what I'm going to do, the reason I would say them here is because that's what I would think. You know, and when I say, oh, look at all these common names, this is going to be very difficult, I might say that to the patron because they may not have the perspective that what they're looking for is going to be not just the process of finding this individual, but they're going to have to find sources that will differentiate these people with all the same names from other places. And how do we do that? We do that primarily by looking at a place. We need to examine the places where these things occurred. And once we know that, then they'll suggest records that we can look at. So let's look at this. Let's go to maps. There we go. And we'll put in, let's get those places. Let's put in the first place, which is Fishkill. If I were on the Chamber of Commerce of Fishkill, I would change the name of the town, but that's fine. Okay, so here's Fishkill, right on the freeway, and got a park. It's obviously not a very big place, but let's pop out a ways and get an idea of where it is. Keep coming out till we find something that we can see kind of the area. We may have to come out further and further. Okay, well, it's north of the big city, and it's up along the river, along the Hudson River, and it is just right off the river. Okay, well, that's pretty good. Let's have a look at it. Let's see what we're dealing with here, and we'll get in here a ways. We'll pull out a little Google Street View person and plop him down right in the middle of the main highway in Fishkill. That's what it looks like. There it is, AT&T. There's the highway. And let's kind of drive down some of these side streets a bit. Okay, what can we tell from this? And what's the purpose of this? This is, the important thing to do here is to become familiar with the area that you're dealing with. Some of the things this is telling me already is, and I'm seeing houses that date back into the 1800s. Okay, I've already seen houses that date back in the 1800s. Those square, that they call sort of cracker box type houses that they have were generally built in the mid to late 1800s. The other thing that's important to see is whether this is an urban area, whether it's a big city, whether it's a small city, is it way out in the country? I mean, sometimes when we do this, we end out in a field. You know, the closest farmhouse is a mile away, and so we drive around and they're all about a mile apart. Or it could be in the mountains, it could be in the desert, it could be any place. What that helps us to know is the kinds of records that might be available here. This is going to be, and if you look across the bottom, I don't know how well you can see it in the video, but when you bring up the street view, it starts bringing up photographs, and inevitably in these smaller towns, it will have a picture of the church. So now we look at the church. Why do we do that? Well, because most of the records that we're going to be involved with in the 1800s are going to be church records. because we want to be identifying the church that they belong to and figure out which ones. I'm surprised, I'm always surprised when I see when people come in and we go back and they say, well, I'm looking for my great-great-great-grandfather, and we go all the way back to that, and I ask them, well, who's the person here? Who's the child? Who's your great-great-great-grandfather, whatever? They say, well, I don't know, his name's right there. I go, well, let's go down until we get down. Sometimes we get clear down to their parents before they know who the person was. And sometimes they don't even know their parents' middle names or where they were born or anything. And I say, well, I don't think we're looking for your great-grandfather. I think you need to start to understand who your parents were, and then we'll work back. Because otherwise, you're lost if you really don't have any anchor to this person at all. No idea who he is or she is. So this is part of the process of getting to know the family. And one of the questions I always ask when we get back there is, what religion were they? And they say, I don't know. I'll say, well, that's the major records that we're going to be looking for. Okay. Okay, so now Bill's family, so what church do they belong to?
I believe the Dutch Reformed, I'm not positive.
Okay, so he thinks it was a Dutch Reformed church, and so what we want to know is, was there a Dutch Reformed church in this area? And the answer would be fairly simple. We go to Google and we put in Fishkill churches, and we look down the list and it says St. Mary Mother of the Church, First Reformed Church, Trinity, Nazarene, Lutheran, and Methodist. And one of the things we may have to do is find out what this was and who these people are. Reformed Church in America.
It could be the Dutch Reformed.
We'll look back here and see what this is. Got a big conference going here. Okay, that doesn't tell us a whole lot. Then we go to history of Reformed churches in America. It's the main line, and incorporated as Reformed Protestant Dutch Church. Okay, so that's where our connection is. Yeah, so there is a church in Fishkill that's a Dutch church. So one of the first places that would suggest to see is whether or not there are any records either kept by that church. Maybe call them up on the phone, say, when was your church founded? How long have you been around? Do you have any records? My family lived there in such and such. Where would I find the records of because they were members of your church? And they can tell you, they'll say, well, we don't keep records here. We send them off to the conference or synod or whatever they call their larger organization, and they should be all there. But by and large, a lot of those church records are preserved. Now, how do we find out if we have any? Well, we go over here to the family search, and we go to the records, and we start out searching for, not this records, excuse me, to the catalog, and we start out searching for places, and we put in New York, and we got United States, New York. No, we don't want New York, we just want United States, New York. search. And these would be the New York records. Now, if you think about how records work, the records, in a sense, my analogy is that as an individual goes through life, there's a cloud of records that's created for that individual, and those records pile up in various jurisdictions. We talk about the word jurisdiction, it means those people that were responsible for keeping records at every level. So you would have records at the local level, municipal records, town records, local school, local church records, those are the kinds of things. And then they would be also kept at the larger level, like a township or a county, up to the state, up to the national level. So we look at the time periods here, and let's go look at this person again. There we go. And we're up here and we say 1836 to 1918. Well, he would have been just exactly the right age to be involved in the Civil War, for one thing. By 1862, he would have been in his 20s, and the chances that he was somehow directly or indirectly involved in the Civil War were very high, especially living that close to New York. So one of the things we would want to see is whether or not he was involved in the Civil War. He would still been old enough to have been possibly at least registered or been interested in some of the subsequent times after the war. Yeah.
I do have his Civil War muster rolls. Doesn't give much information.
Right. So you've actually found him in the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, sometimes if he was just a private soldier, meaning a private in the army, not private from like a public soldier, but a private. That was his rank, then there wasn't a whole lot of information they kept on him.
My problem was he mustered in August of '62. He deserted in September. So.
Oh, he didn't last long.
Okay.
Okay. So he wasn't a celebrated local Civil War hero.
No, I don't think so.
They don't have a statue to him in the town
I couldn't
square.
find the statue.
Fishkill, New York. Or his name is not appearing on a plaque. Great Civil War veterans of our city. No, okay, well, okay, too bad. That's a good thing, though. We got to rule that kind of stuff out. Okay, so let's go back to the catalog search. Now we've got all these New York records, and the answer is you need to look at the list of these records because regardless of the status of the person, they could possibly have shown up on one of these kinds of records. These are records kept or at least stored on a statewide basis. So you might look for town records, vital records, anything that's here that falls in that particular time period while the family was alive. It gives you a pretty good idea that that's a record you should probably be familiar with. We want to go ahead and look further, so we're going to go to Genesee? Dutchess County. And then these would be the county records. Now these you're going to look at a little more carefully because many activities were recorded on a county-wide basis. Now we're going to have to look at the time periods here for the counties and cities. But right now we're just kind of doing a general idea of and then we can go to places within, and here's East and Fishkill and East Fishkill. So we probably want to check out both of those, but let's try the one on Fishkill. And here we go, we have probate records, land and property records. What do we have in land records? Deeds from 1720 to 1792, that doesn't help us maybe. Extract of wills from 1766 to 1785. Okay, well, here's what I would try to do. One of the things, says he was born there in 1836. So his parents probably lived there. I mean, they lived somewhere near there. And so I would start looking for land records from the county, for the whole county. And I would look at any Williams that showed up in a land record. And that land record, whether it covered the time period, I would go back as much as from the time of his birth, I'd go back all the way to the 1800 or before, looking for anybody in that particular area named Williams. That would give me a pool of people to start to focus on.
Usually land records don't give you children.
No, they don't give you children, but they give you names and they give you the identity of a place, so we could start looking for more places. See, what we're trying to do is find records, not names. So we have to switch our view from thinking of, I'm going to keep looking for these names, as we're going to say, what kind of records can I generate from this area?
I found 3 Williams families living in that area, and 2 of them seem to fit my great-grandfather here, Benjamin Williams and the Amos Williams.
And that would probably be helpful because down here in the list of children, there is there?
There's a Benjamin right there, yeah.
Yeah, I thought in this first.
Second one.
Second family. Yeah, there's Benjamin Franklin. Well, Benjamin Franklin. Maybe the father's name was Benjamin Franklin too. Who knows? Everybody named it.
Peter Anthony, Benjamin Franklin.
Okay, so let's go back to our map because we're going to need to know a little bit more information. Okay, so here's our Fishkill. We'll go back to the map here and look at the map of the area. Now, what we want to know is we want to know some directions here. So we're going to go from Fishkill, and the next place we're going to drive to is to Glenham, New York, because that's where the wife was supposed to have been born. So, I can get rid of that. Okay, here we go. So we want to be in Glenham. There it is. First one up. Okay, 2 miles away. No problem. Okay, why do we do this? Well, too many times what will happen is I'll look at a place and then you'll say, okay, and one example is father is born in San Francisco, mother's born in New York, baby's born in Oklahoma. The question is, how did the family get together and how did the baby get born in Oklahoma? And so, but that's kind of an extreme, but what happens is in other places like, good example is Denmark, Norway, Sweden, wherever. Everybody had the same names. If you go into a town, it's not unusual that you'll have 5 people with the same name, born on the same day, with the same parents' names. Just because there's so few names that were used. And so, how do you differentiate between these families? You have to go down to the house level. You have to actually identify which house they lived in. And once you do that, they actually have house censuses that show, that were kept by the church, that show who lived in each house every year. So you're able to track the families. Well, we don't have that convenience here in the United States, but we do have similar records, one of which is tax records. Tax records show when people show up, and they also show when people disappear. So you can go through the tax records, which are often not as easily accessible as some, but they are kept, and the tax records will show that they go on the tax rolls, and then you'll see them paying taxes every year for so many years, and then all of a sudden they leave. Either they moved or they died.
Property taxes.
Real estate taxes, the taxes that they'll be paying, which they were charged taxes all the way back to 1620. And the first thing the Pilgrims did when they got off the boat was not get food or have a Thanksgiving. What they did was they set up a tax structure. Started taxing people. Actually, they went the other way around. They distributed all the property in common, and after 2 years, they decided that didn't work. So then they gave everybody their own land. But once they gave everybody the land, then they could start assessing people. So that's kind of how it works. Okay, let's go to the next place, because some of these places may or may not be helpful. Okay, let's go down. We've got Fishkill. Pretty much, they stayed right there. And and Duchess, which means she may or may not have got home to. Now, this is just a county. This doesn't tell us where they died.
Right, that's just a county.
Could still be fished.
Could be, yeah.
We've got Clove Valley. Let's find out where Clove Valley is. That's a good one. Let's see. There's a road called Clove Valley.
I don't think Clove Valley exists anymore. Kind of like Bog Hollow doesn't exist anymore either.
Okay, well, we can find it. We'll find Clove Valley, but I'll show you how that's done. We won't look. We know something's going on there. And then we'll keep going down here. We've got New York doesn't help us. New York doesn't help us. With a name like James and Fred, unless you have, I think what we do when we look down here, we'll see there's lots of census records. So that census record's probably been picked up showing that person as a child of that family. And we can look at that, but we won't right this second. And then we'll look here, Oak Summit, try that one. That's another road thing. Okay. Millbrook.
Millbrook's still around.
Millbrook, New York. Okay, now that's a fair piece up the road. That's 30 miles away, but that's still not outside of what you could call reality. I mean, it's possible. People do travel 30 miles. And may have had relatives up there, but every time you go to one of these, think about this, here's the first rule. This is the rule that you've got to remember. This is the basic first rule of genealogy. This is the first starting place of everything, and that is, when the baby was born, the mother was there.
Pretty much.
Now, the problem I have is that almost inevitably, during the course of a couple of weeks of talking to people, someone will say something that totally contradicts that. In other words, to say, well, the baby was born over here, and the mother lived over here. And I'll say, well, yeah, but the mother had to be there when the baby was born, so we have to figure out how the mother got to Oklahoma or wherever the baby was supposed to be born. Or you got the wrong person, or we have to get to the backstory here, or we won't understand how this all works. So we're looking here, and 30 miles doesn't make me get too upset. She could have been visiting even a friend and just decided to have a baby at the time. Oh, she didn't decide, but somebody did. Okay, so now we're to the next one, Bog Hollow. Well, that's another place. Let's see if that Bog Hollow exists. There's a Bog Hollow Road, brook.
Well, what the road tell you how far away it is? Because the road wouldn't end.
Well, this is Wassiack, New York. We try that. We try that Bog Hollow Road. Now, see, that's clear over there. We're getting way far afield here. But maybe they had a job up there or do something. I don't know. You've got to figure out some other things to explain how this all got together. And then she's back to Oak Summit. And then she's back to Millbrook.
They were twins, so Royal and Eli.
Oh, okay, so we got twins, Oak Summit. Okay, we've got some places here. What are we going to do? Well, let's go to Fishkill and I don't think Reformed Church anymore. Let's go to Fishkill, New York, not churches. Let's just look at Fishkill here. Town of Fishkill in Wikipedia. One nice thing about Wikipedia, about the internet, this Wikipedia program, they're systematically been added to this almost every populated place in the entire world. So if it's big enough to have a Walmart, no, not quite that big. But if it's big enough to show up on a map, it probably has a separate page here on Wikipedia. So there's a overwhelming amount of information about these places. So let's look and see what happened here. Okay, it was 2,000 people. Means it's okay. It's a big place. It probably has Walmart. Let's see. It was located in the Wapinger Indians. It was part of the Robo patent. And New Amsterdam, it's all Dutch stuff. Johannes Terboos and Henry Roskrantz. 1716, the settlers wanted their own Dutch Reformed church, so they didn't have to cross the river to Kingston. And so they established the church building was finished. And the first dominee who arrived, the minister, in 1731. Okay, so this is way back. This place has been around for a long time. Okay, but we want to know where it is exactly. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, when you get into Wikipedia, you'll have coordinates. If you click on those coordinates, what you get is called a geohack. The geohack gives you a listing of every place that place appears in a mapping program on the internet. So we have a huge number of places to go look about this place. But one of the more useful ones is this one, especially for places like Clove Valley. And what this does is this is called GeoNames, and it's actually a website, geonames.org. And what they've done is they have loaded into the program all of the geographic names that they found from all over the world, local and international, everything. And so if you pick a place out of Wikipedia, and Wikipedia will add in all of the other surrounding geographic locations: cemeteries, schools, churches, mountains, buildings, rivers, roads, everything that's shows up. So basically, all these little flags are all the things around Fishkill. So there's 58 different items here. So we go down through it. First Reformed Church of Fishkill, right there. So now you even have the location on the map. It's number 3. So if we shut this up and look at number 3, we'll see that it's right here in the middle of town. Okay. So now we'll go. Up. I think I need to move out a slightly. Oh, that's more than 100. Well, we'll go back in. There we go. Back to our 58 list. Okay, Trinity, Fishkill Elementary, and then we. Clove Creek.
Clove Valley.
Clove Valley. Where did I go? Oh, there it is. Okay, so, but here's Clove Creek. So we have a Clove Creek, and it is number 30, right there. Okay, so it's just south of there. Now, why would that be important? There's the creek, actually, you can see it. Because that would be my candidate for a place to start looking for their property.
That's where she died.
Yellow Creek. Well, that's where the baby was born. That's what it says on one of the babies, on one of the kids. Well, where they died. Well, we're going to start looking because they stayed there and died there. That's right outside. I mean, that's part of the whole town. I mean, but that gives you sort of a neighborhood way. Now, whether or not there's houses there today doesn't really matter because this was almost 200 years ago, 150 years ago plus, and so we don't know. In the East, they had a tendency to let the trees grow if nobody lived there, and so everything you see where there's trees doesn't mean that there wasn't a house there previously. It just means that's where the trees are now. It's interesting. If you think about the history of how this all worked, why they came up the Hudson Valley was because that was an easy pathway to come into the country. So it was settled very early because they had boat transportation up and down the river from New York, from the port. And so when they established this, then they were spread out. Well, as they moved across the country, they cut down all the trees. So if you go back to old pictures, back in the 1800s when they started taking photographs in 1840s would be the earliest ones. So in the 1840s, with the earliest photographs in the East, you'll see just huge areas with no trees. I mean, you'll go out there. I'm particularly interested in some areas in upper New York State where my family lived. And there's just nothing. It's just completely clear cut. Now you go back today, and there's solid trees again. So it's just interesting how they originally did it. Obviously, back then they were cutting them down to burn for fuel, and so they had a tendency to get rid of them all. But you got to understand that when you're looking at these maps and that. So let's see what else we've got. We didn't go through the whole list. We ended up with a Clove Valley. Glenham, right here. Glenham Post Office.
Just down the road.
Just down the road. It's right there. So what happens as you do this, as you're picking up all of these different geographic areas, each time you do that, you can focus on that for land and property records. Now, you may not be able to find the father's name, but you go through all the children and find their land ownership. Where did they own it? And see who they got their deed from. If they got it from their father, then he owned it all of this. If they got it from somebody else, then they went out and bought land. And you look at the witnesses to see who was around, other family members. If a name shows up on more than one deed, they were probably a relative. Then you're looking out at the history of this area, and the history is going to come out in the property records. And we're back to where we were searching in Family Search, and we've got the county, and we want to go to what else is in here. And we've got Fishkill, church records. That was another area that we talked about a minute ago. And here's the church 1745 to 1850 Dutch Church Reform records in Fishkill. Now, I'm sure you probably have looked at these. So there's your Dutch Reformed church records. Now, what I would do is go back through this and start looking for the names of anybody who shows up on that list or anybody that shows up on a deed until we find out who the family group was. Yeah, well, there's all sorts of things. There's going to be all these Dutch Reformed records here that cover the time period that we're interested in. And in this case, here's the process you go through. With any place where there's common names, it works for Wales, it works for Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Scandinavian countries. It works for any name where the name is Smith, Jones, common. Williams is another very common name. Okay. So what they do is you set up a spreadsheet, And you start listing all the people with that surname in that particular little geographic area. Now, we didn't find anything too far afield. Question would be, we've already established that this was the case, but let's look one more place to find out where the county was. Let's look at the county. And what we look at is called the Newbury Atlas of Historic County Boundaries, historical county boundaries, and it's the Newbury Library in Chicago, and they have put this together. We'll go to New York, and we'll look at the individual county chronologies, and we want to go down to too far to get to D. Okay, it was formed in 1683, Dutchess County. Okay, we want to find out how it evolved. So we'll go back to the map. This is the map of New York counties as they were in 1776. Now you can put in any year you want to here, and it'll adjust it. So let's go to his year, which is 1836, and see what was going on then. Going to be a big change between 1776 and 1836. And also we want the modern county names. Okay, now the black lines here are the counties as they existed in 1776. Now, let's say, for example, your family lived in this thing called Tryon County. Somebody said, well, he was born in Tryon County, New York, in 1780 or 1776. You go, okay, that's fine. The records could be in any one of those white outlined counties. So what are you doing then? You're searching almost the entire state of New York for records. So understanding that makes it so you understand that that's how you're going to be looking. So let's go out there, refresh the map for 1836. Now, you can see what happened in New York between 1776 and 1836. What happened? Everything was settled.
I'm over Tryon County either.
Yeah, Tryon County disappears. We've got right up from Dutchess County, right straight up from New York, right up the river from New York City, and its boundaries are exactly the same as they are today. So one thing we don't have to worry about is a county boundary change during the time period that we're involved with here. We know that the place was definitely located somewhere in the middle of that county, and we don't have to worry about that. So if the records are kept, they would have been kept in Dutchess County, and they probably didn't migrate all the way across the state, except at a very, very early time that we're not going to worry about right now. So right now we don't have to worry about that. What we do have to worry about is if we pull this off and look at this map, kind of change map thing, and we see the records moving, we see the counties changing back and forth, then you have an interesting challenge. Same thing happens here in New York on a very accelerated basis as happened in Pennsylvania. What happens in Pennsylvania, for example, just down the road from New York there, the old counties took in most of what we now have as the state, and the records migrated as they formed new counties. The new counties got the old records, and they migrated across the state, and we have literally had people find records in the western counties, like Morgan County, on the border with Ohio, that started out in the east part of the state. So you have to be careful to watch the chronology and how this all fit together. Okay. Let's go back to, where are we again? Okay, well, I don't think we need that. Okay, now we're back here to some records. We've got church records, and we've got land and property records. 1720 to 1792. Okay, one of the things that is going to be a little bit of a challenge here, they're not sitting in the Family History Library, the Family Search Catalog. So we don't have necessarily, let's go back to the county. This is the county. No, this is Michigan. Let's go back to the county and see if there's what records that we can get. Land and property. Here we go. Okay, mortgages from 1808 to 22. Court records on land and property, 1718 and 1901. Index to deeds, 1718 to 1950. Mortgages, 1742 to 1770. I certainly looked at that. Nine partners patent. I'd look and see what that is. 18th century records of the Duchess. Road records. Homestead exemptions, 1851. Probably look at that because these people looked at, they may not have been the richest people in the world. Land and tax records, 1780 to 1842. That's pretty early. 16 land records, 1697 to 1907. Really looks to me like I would be going, if it were me, I would be going through every single record on that list, one by one. I would just start down through the list, and if it's a microfilm, obviously you can order it in here to the BYU library for free. Nice benefit of working through the BYU Family History Library, and then it stays here, so you don't have a time limit to start looking at it. The restriction, I think, is you can order two at a time, and you have to wait till the next two come in before you can order your next two. But it's, at least it goes like that. And the other thing that would be helpful would be to, because here's the point. Once you have figured out the exact place where these people live, then you have things like tax records you can go to that will tell you when they moved in and out, who they got their property from, perhaps. And looking at the deeds, especially if you find the deeds for the original purchases of the property, you'll see where they came from. It's possible that this Peter Williams got his property from his father. In which case, his father's going to be identified on that deed. And his mother will probably be identified because if the father gave a deed, then the wife had to sign the deed, or they had to have a separate, what's called a disclaimer deed that gives the information that says that the wife gives up her dower interest or her marital interest in the property in order for it to be conveyed. So there's your homework task. Huge pile of land records to look at. Okay, does that help? No?
Yeah, it does. Somewhere area, start searching.
Yep. Okay.
The question was, if you go back to Wikipedia and put in some of those old hollows, did you find it that way?
Not usually. They're usually just populated places. What we're looking at here, the question is, can you find things like Bog Hollow and things like that in Wikipedia? Not usually. What you will find is the populated places that get to be significant. But what happens here is that these places may have been a populated place at the time that back in the 1800s, but they're no longer there. They're no longer called that. The only reference we may have to it is a map reference or a street reference or whatever. When one story is my great-great-grandfather was from Ireland and the place they recorded was not correct, it didn't exist. I guessed that there was a place near that had a name that started with M and sounded like the same place, but it could have been. But it was a street, it was a road. And it wasn't until quite a few years after doing research that I figured out that I used this program geonames.org to find a populated place with that same name. When I go there today, there's nothing there. There's still a church called that, but there's only about a half a dozen houses at that location. So it's really a small place. But the advantage of the map things. Now, there's the comprehensive one is in, if you really wanted to find that Bog Hollow, for example, you would go to the Board on Geographic Names, which is the USGS website. It's easy to just put in Board on Geographic Names because it's geonames.ugs.gov, but it's just as easy to do it. So you look for domestic names. You can look for international names. What this Board on Geographic Names has been doing, it began in, I think when we get in here, let's see, in the 1890s, and then became its present form in 1947. But since that time, in the early years, it's been gathering maps and extracting all the geographic information off of those maps and putting it in this huge database called the GeoNames database. And that's where most of that information in that first program. It's just, this one just comes up with the name. It doesn't come up with, showing you on a map or letting you drive to the place. So here you do a search, and you put in the Bog Hollow, was it? And then you put in the state. And then go to the county. Dutchess. And send the query. Okay, so far I didn't find it. Okay. Let's go back to, let's go to Clove Valley. Okay, here's Clove Valley, populated place in Dutchess County, New York. So there was actually a town called Clove Valley. And if we go down here to the bottom, you'll see the latitude and longitude. And these aren't the minutes, degrees, seconds kind of thing, the things that degrees, minutes, and seconds that you're normal. This is the decimal coordinates. So now we're going to go to maps again. And when we're back to Google Maps, the thing about Google Maps is it does accept those coordinates as being a place. So there it is. There's Clove Valley. It's on Clove Valley Road, coincidentally.
Wow.
Okay. But that's what they call Clove Valley, is that intersection. And if you wanted to
Back out of it, yeah.
look at it, you pull it out here and pop it over on the intersection and have a look at Clove Valley. There's obviously somebody living there. And those are old houses.
Back out, see what that really is in Dutchess County.
Yeah, and if you pop it out, you'll see where it is from where we were looking earlier. We see that it is, well, let's go from there, directions from there to Fishkill. It is 16 miles away.
That's where one of the sons died. That's where one of the sons died. Clove Valley.
So they all stayed in that same area. So the land records in Dutchess County are going to come up with deeds back and forth. Of course, you can, if things turn out interesting, you could be like the Tanners who ended up in New York from Rhode Island. And when I went into the microfilms records here for the Tanner records, there were well over 100 deeds. And I bogged down at that point. And in fact, the Rhode Island, the number of deeds that they had in Rhode Island just got astronomically big. So they did a lot of land trading back and forth. But it looks like you have, you can focus in on the family members here in the group. You've got a pretty compact geographic area. You should be able to find
Pretty much
deeds
stayed
and
in
tax
Dutchess
records.
County.
Yeah, look at the dates, look at the tax registers, look at the names on the tax registers, correspond, and when you're trying to figure this out, it helps to put all the names, the Williams names you find on a spreadsheet, and then mark whether they had a deed, in, out, tax record, church record, wherever they show up. So then you can start getting an idea of when these people lived and died, where they were. And it's very possible that a church record would show where they came from. So if this Peter Williams was the first guy to walk in there, except my guess is with a name like Peter Williams, his father's name might not have been Peter Williams. His names might have been a Dutch name.
Third family that was there was Benjamin, Amos, and there was a Peter Williams also.
Oh, okay. Well, if the land records might connect all these people together.
Census records.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.